Every day, Joe Biden chooses more people for his cabinet, and we're getting a better idea of what it's gonna look like. And we already know that just based off of the choices he's already made, that it is going to have a higher level of diversity of a number of different forms than most past cabinets, perhaps ever before in US history. But is that the end of our concerns? Joining us now to talk about it is columnist for Business Insider, Manny Fidel. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
How's it going, John? And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, glad to have you here. So you wrote an article for Business Insider about this diversity and what it means and also what it doesn't mean. So tell us a little bit about that.
For sure. So my analysis on this is kind of two-pronged. In the article, I mentioned that on one hand, the effort for diversity on the Biden administration's part feels a little bit strenuous. It doesn't feel super genuine. And my first example I use is Marcia Fudge, who was appointed head of the House and Urban Development Department. And the reason I say in the article is that in November, Marcia Fudge actually critiqued all the past administrations for only choosing Black people and people of color for that position for HUD. So we know that Ben Carson has had that role, and we know that Julian Castro has had that role as well. So she critiqued it and say, it's time for us to finally transcend that role. And then lo and behold, a month later, she was inevitably picked for that same exact role. And she's qualified for the job, and I'm sure she'll do well. But it gave me a little bit of a concern that Biden's administration either ignored her critique or just didn't care about it.
Yeah. I found that to be a really interesting pick when it happened, considering her comments. Has she directly addressed her prior comments and why she, in the end, ended up choosing the position?
Not to my knowledge, and it would make complete sense why she wouldn't. But yeah, I just figured that this in my administration totally looks over those comments and ended up picking her for a role that she literally just critiqued.
So aside from Marcia Fudge heading up HUD, what are some of the other standout appointments that you have some concerns about?
Sure. So Lloyd Austin was chosen for Secretary of Defense, and in terms of diversity strictly, it makes a lot of sense. He's just as capable of doing this job than the myriad number of white people that came before him. But the problem comes in the fact that that job that he's just as capable of doing actually brings a lot of harm around the world, and especially in most parts of the Arab world. So one example of that is a defense contractor named Raytheon that Lloyd Austin sits on the board of, made an $8 billion weapons deal to Saudi Arabia, and in turn, Saudi Arabia is using that money to bomb Yemeni civilians in what's a lot of people are considering the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, so definitely some concern there. Sort of what I'm concerned about is, we have diversity that's been demonstrated obviously in terms of he has a lot of women on his team, especially his communications team, racial diversity as well. He has talked about how he also has ideological diversity. He's mentioned that he has progressives. But then he makes some of these choices where their appointment, as you've pointed out, in terms of fossil fuel money and stuff like that, seems to directly cut against the way he's trying to pitch himself on these issues. Does it make more sense to you that perhaps in his quest to have diversity in his cabinet, he is overlooking things like past campaign finance and things like that? Or is this sort of a way to get people who conform more to a sort of centrist democratic way of doing government in a way that makes it a little bit harder to criticize it? Like, I'm trying to figure out the motivation for some of these picks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it hinges more on your former point, where these selections feel a little bit strenuous, right? They don't feel like a genuine effort to create diversity. Instead, they feel like it feels like they're trying to look good on paper, and when trying to do that, you do end up overlooking a lot of concerns, like I mentioned with Marcia Fudge earlier, who criticized the role she was inevitably chosen for. There's a way to do this correctly. I mentioned in my article that one good example of diversifying the cabinet is Representative Deborah Haaland, who's a member of the Laguna Pueblo Native American tribe, and there aren't any qualms with her appointment because she has a proven record of fighting for her community and fighting for the rights of indigenous people. But that sense of security you get with her appointment, you don't necessarily get with the other appointees that I mentioned.
Yeah. So obviously, I think the one of the main points of your article that I think is a great idea is to get people to start to pay attention to some of these appointments and to have expectations going into when they eventually go through the nomination process and get these positions. In terms of if we want them to make good on some of the more progressive promises that Joe Biden has made, what are some ways that in these different areas you think we might be able to pressure these people, or being cabinet positions, are they a little bit insulated from that?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's gonna take a lot of pressure. It's gonna take a lot of pressure from progressives who already have a seat at that table. And to be clear, it's not an easy job to do, but it's one that's extremely necessary. I've been involved in trying to diversify the workplaces that I've been at, in my professional career. It's a lot of work. It's tough, and it's a mental challenge as well. But in order to get more picks like Deborah Haaland, it's just going to take a lot of work. And as always with progressives, everything is an uphill battle.
100%. One last question though. He's chosen a lot of positions, including some of the big ones. Secretary of Defense is obviously a very important position. Are there any outstanding positions that you potentially have hopes that he might choose someone who both increases diversity, but also, is a little bit more ideologically close to the direction that the Democratic Party is going in?
Unfortunately, I think all of the big, department heads of department are taken up by the positions I just named, and it's kind of like, now I'm just retroactively wishing they had been different. But of course, there's always room in the future for, when people leave office, as we've seen in the Trump administration, people were leaving left and right. There's always an opportunity to replenish those empty positions with people that constituents are more comfortable with.
Yeah. Well, if you'd like more details on some of these appointments, including their histories, you can head over to Business Insider. The article is titled "The Diversity of Biden's Cabinet Will Be Just for Show If It Ends Up Promoting Bad Policies." Manny, as always, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Happy New Year to everyone at TYT.
You too. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.